The deck is slick with salt water. A cabin boy watches in horror as grim-faced pirates prepare the body of their fallen comrade. They don't just toss him overboard. They methodically tie a heavy cannonball to his feet. In a world where the only law was the absence of it, there was one rule that even the most hardened cutthroat feared to break. It wasn't about gold or mutiny. It was about the dead. Because pirates knew the most terrifying thing wasn't dying at sea. The most terrifying thing was the sea giving you back. A standard 9-pound cannonball was tied to the feet, about 9 pounds of cast iron. A piece of the ship's firepower turned into an anchor for the soul. These men, who robbed, killed, and betrayed for profit, suddenly showed an almost religious reverence for the fallen. This wasn't respect. It was fear. Something compelled them to spend precious time and energy on a complex ritual when enemy ships could still be nearby. This act holds the key to the entire psychology of the pirate era. Pirate articles, like the Code of Bartholomew Roberts, detailed the division of plunder and punishments for cowardice. But this most crucial ritual was never written down. It was more important than any written law, passed down as an unbreakable, grim tradition. And it wasn't just about the cannonball. The body was wrapped in old sailcloth, a gruesome task typically performed by the ship's sailmaker. Only he had needles large enough and thread strong enough. Legend says he made the final stitch. Straight through the deceased's nose, the feet were bound as tightly as possible. Every element of this ritual was not a tribute, but a step in a safety protocol, one designed to protect not the dead but the living. The final stitch through the nose had a dual purpose. First, to ensure the person was truly dead, as the pain would have woken them. Second, a superstition that it pinned the soul to the body, preventing it from becoming a ghost. Here, we will crack this code. The most obvious explanation is sanitation. A dead body in a hot climate is a breeding ground for disease. This is logical, but it doesn't explain the ritual. To stop disease, you could simply toss the body overboard, quick and clean. But they didn't. This means they feared something worse than dysentery. They feared something worse than yellowjack, the sailor's name for the yellow fever that could wipe out an entire crew in a week. The very fact that they handled the body, risking infection, proves one thing. In their minds, the supernatural threat was far more real than the biological one. Perhaps then, it was about morale. Sending a comrade off with honors is important for a crew. This is also true, but the Royal Navy buried its dead with no less dignity, and their rituals were entirely different. The naval ceremony was rooted in grief. The pirate ceremony was rooted in carefully concealed panic. His Majesty's sailors had a priest and the Book of Common Prayer. Their goal was to send the soul to God. Pirates had no priests. Their ritual was not a prayer but a technical manual for neutralizing a corpse, a guarantee that it would never return. Now, put yourself on that deck for a moment. You've just survived a boarding action. Adrenaline is still coursing through your veins. Next to you lies someone less fortunate. Your first, instinctive desire is to get rid of this grim reminder of death as quickly as possible. But the captain orders the start of a long, methodical procedure. The acrid smell of gunpowder and blood still hangs in the air, yet you're told not to clean your muskets or patch the sails. You're told to sew up a corpse. This was the clearest possible statement of priorities on the ship. First, we secure ourselves from the dead, then, from everything else. And this is where the grim biology begins. After death, the human body decomposes, producing gases. In water, it initially sinks. But after a few days, these gases can push it back to the surface. Imagine a bloated, unrecognizable corpse floating up next to your ship in the middle of the ocean. For us, it's merely disgusting. For a 17th century sailor, it was a sign. This process is called putrefaction. Bacteria inside the body produce methane and hydrogen sulfide, turning the deceased into its own nightmarish life jacket. In the warm waters of the Caribbean, this could happen in just 2 or 3 days. So the practical reasons don't hold up. Pirates weren't afraid of disease or low morale. They were afraid of the body itself. A surfaced corpse wasn't just a body. In the crew's eyes, it became a harbinger of a curse, a soul rejected by the sea itself, And that meant only one thing. It would now come back for them. Its soul had been cast out even from Davy Jones's locker, the mythical seabed where all who drowned were sent. And if even the sea devil wouldn't take you, your place was now among the living, as an eternal terror. Sailors had various names for this phenomenon: the floater, the returner, a bad omen. To see one meant the entire ship was cursed. It was the most terrifying omen, worse than the Flying Dutchman, because this ghost was your comrade, not some distant legend. In essence, it was a maritime version of the Draugr, the undead creature from Norse sagas that guards its treasure and kills the living. Only here, the treasure was the crew's lives, and the grave was the entire ocean. And this Draugr wasn't a mythical warrior. It was the man you shared a drink with yesterday. For a regular sailor, this was a bad omen. For a pirate, whose soul was already heavy with sin, it was a personal ticket to hell. They believed the sea was a living entity. If it spat out a body, it meant the sea had refused to accept a sinner's soul, and that meant it wouldn't accept their souls either. This was existential dread. Imagine a bouncer at the filthiest port tavern, a place that welcomes the lowest dregs of society, grabbing you by the collar and throwing you out, saying, "You're too wicked even for us." That's what a pirate felt when the sea, their only home and ally, rejected one of their own. Now, let's look at this from the captain's bridge. For him, a floater wasn't a mystical threat, but a direct threat to his authority. One such incident, and the crew would be on the verge of mutiny. Sailors would start seeing omens in every seagull. Discipline would collapse. Therefore, the ritual was not just superstition, it was a critical tool of control. The captain had to show that he knew how to negotiate with the sea and protect his crew. A man like Blackbeard, who wove lit fuses into his beard to look like the devil, understood the power of theater. For him, this ritual was not superstition, but a performance. He was demonstrating to his crew that he controlled not only the living, but also the dead, and even the will of the ocean itself. This terror wasn't unique to pirates. It's part of a vast tapestry of maritime superstitions. Mermaids luring men to their deaths, sirens, the kraken, all are attempts to rationalize the irrational fear of the abyss. But the story of the returner was the most personal and the most real, because it was based on a genuine biological process they couldn't explain except as supernatural. To a 17th century sailor, the ocean was what outer space is to us, an infinite hostile void where the laws of the land do not apply. Their superstitions, from forbidding whistling on deck to this burial ritual, were their version of NASA's checklists, safety protocols for survival in an alien environment. So the objective was clear. The body must remain at the bottom, forever. Simply sinking it was a gamble. They needed a reliable, foolproof method, an engineering solution to a mystical problem. And the pirates created one. In essence, they invented the world's first system for the irreversible deletion of data for the human body. Let's reverse engineer this grim technology. It all began with coarse, salt-stiffened sailcloth. The body was wrapped tightly, creating a cocoon that concealed injuries and symbolically sealed the spirit within. And then came the moment for the famous maritime legend, the sailmaker's final stitch, made straight through the deceased's nose. It was a brutal but reliable test. If the person were still alive, even in a deep coma, they would certainly have woken up. It was a guarantee they weren't burying someone alive. This practice, strangely enough, was not exclusive to pirates. It is also documented in the journals of Royal Navy surgeons, in an era when determining death was difficult. This was a final, desperate test for signs of life. Next came the weight, usually a cannonball or a heavy piece of ballast. The weight had to be excessive to ensure it would counteract the buoyant force of decomposition gases. A cannonball was ideal, compact, incredibly heavy, and always available. The symbol of the ship's power now served as an anchor for the soul, chaining it to the seabed, to Davy Jones's locker. To put it in modern terms, simply throwing a body overboard is like moving a file to the recycling bin. Wrapping it in a shroud is like zipping it into an archive. But tying a cannonball to it is like applying an algorithm for permanent data erasure with multiple overwrites. It's a guarantee the file will never be recovered. A crucial detail: the weight was attached specifically to the feet. This ensured the body would sink vertically, feet first. This was fundamentally important. It symbolized a final descent downward into the underworld. If the body sank horizontally or head first, it could be interpreted as an attempt to return or look back. No chances were taken. On land, the deceased is lowered into a grave horizontally. At sea, where the grave is vertical, this ritual mimicked a step or a descent into the abyss. The body had to walk into the afterlife, not fall into it. It was an imitation of a final journey. From a physics standpoint, how effective was this protocol? Absolutely effective. Sufficient weight attached to a body will reliably keep it at any depth. The pirates, without knowing it, had found the perfect engineering solution. They used the laws of physics to combat their metaphysical fears. It was a triumph of pragmatism disguised as superstition. They intuitively solved a problem based on Archimedes' principle. The buoyant force of the water, and later the decomposition gases, had to be less than the force of gravity on the body plus the cannonball. They didn't know the formulas, but through experience they found a solution that would pass a physics exam. The ceremony was brief, no long sermons. Often, it consisted of a few simple words addressed not to God, but to the sea, a request to accept the soul and grant it peace. It was a transaction. The crew gave the sea a body prepared to all technical specifications, and in return, the sea guaranteed their safety from its ghost. After that, the body was slid overboard, and a sense of relief settled over the ship. On a pirate ship, where a mutiny could erupt over the division of rum, this ritual was sacrosanct. It was one of the few laws that united everyone, from the captain to the cabin boy. To violate it was unthinkable because it meant endangering the entire ship. Thus, superstition became the foundation for social order in a state of anarchy. This ritual was the keystone in the arch of pirate society. Remove it, and the fragile structure of temporary alliances, fear, and greed would immediately collapse. It was the only law that didn't need to be enforced by violence. Its police. Force was a universal primal terror. Let's return to our cabin boy from the beginning. What is he really seeing? He sees that even the most fearsome cutthroats are afraid of something intangible. He is learning the most important lesson for survival on this ship. The laws of physics and the laws of mysticism are equally important here. Your salvation depends not only on your skill with a cutlass, but also on your knowledge of and respect for the unseen rules of this world. For him, it's like a young programmer's first day on the job. He can learn the coding language, but the real lesson comes when he's shown the old legacy code. No one understands how it works, but everyone is afraid to touch it because it holds the entire system together. The sea and its laws were that code. Think about it. How different are our rituals from those of the pirates? A pilot walking around the plane before takeoff, a surgeon who always listens to a specific piece of music before an operation. These are all ways to take control of the uncontrollable, to bring order to chaos through repetitive, familiar actions. The pirate ritual is just an extreme version of what we all do every day. Psychologists call this the illusion of control. This phenomenon, first described by psychologist Ellen Langer in 1975, proves a simple point. People tend to overestimate their ability to influence random events. The pirate ritual is a powerful example of creating an illusion of control over death itself. Thus, this grim rite was everything to the pirates at once: insurance against a curse, a tool of management, and an initiation ceremony. It transformed a group of bandits into a single organism, bound by a common fear and a common method of overcoming it. But which was more important? What was primary, the fear or the desire to control? The answer to this question reveals the very essence of the pirate mindset. So what was this ritual really? A shield forged from primal fear to protect the living from the dead? Or a chain forged from that same fear to control the living with the dead? It was both. The shield and the chain were forged from the same metal. This unwritten code can be reduced to three simple but unbreakable laws of the pirate afterlife. The first law: The boomerang effect. The primary driver of the ritual is the fear that the sea will return your sin to you in the form of your comrade's bloated body. It is a curse you brought upon your own ship. The second law. The Archimedes Protocol. The ritual with the cannonball at the feet is not magic. It is the ruthless engineering of superstition, a pragmatic use of physical laws to solve a metaphysical problem, a guarantee that the boomerang will not return. The third law. The drowned man's constitution. In a world without laws, the only functioning constitution is a shared primal terror. This fear ensured order and control over the crew better than any whip. The story of the pirate ritual is not just a spooky sea tale. It's a story of how the human mind copes with its greatest fear, the fear of death and the unknown. When there is no science to explain a frightening phenomenon, we create a ritual. When there are no laws to maintain order, we create a superstition. The pirates were beta testers of the human psyche under conditions of extreme isolation and stress. Their rituals were patches and hotfixes for the operating system of our consciousness, which constantly threatened to show a blue screen of death from the terror of the unknown. And now, the main question for you. What do you think was the root cause of this ritual? A sincere, primal fear of the supernatural, or the cold, pragmatic calculation of captains who used superstition to manage their crews? Write just one word in the comments, fear or calculation. Let's see which is more common. It's the eternal debate about human nature. What drives us primarily? Our inner demons or external manipulators? Your answer in the comments is your vote in this debate.